The day Rumi lost his master was the day the world split open, not with thunder, not with fire, but with absence. Imagine loving someone so completely that their presence rearranges your soul, and then one morning, they are gone. No farewell, no explanation, only silence where a universe once lived. This is not just the story of a poet. This is the story of what happens when love is stripped away and something greater begins to burn. Because when Shams of Tabriz disappeared, Rumi did not simply grieve, he unraveled, and in that unraveling, he found God. Before the disappearance, Rumi was respected, admired, a scholar surrounded by students in Konya. He knew theology, he knew law, he knew scripture, but knowledge is not fire. Then Shams arrived, wild, unpredictable, luminous. Their meeting was like lightning striking dry earth. Rumi would later write, "The minute I heard my first love story, I started looking for you." That longing, buried for years beneath books and reputation, suddenly had a face. Shams did not teach him new doctrines, he shattered his certainty. He asked him questions that could not be answered with memorized verses. He pulled him away from applause and into annihilation. People whispered. They grew jealous. They did not understand the intensity of their bond. Was it friendship? Was it spiritual union? Was it madness? Whatever it was, it consumed Rumi. He stopped teaching as he once did. He disappeared into conversations that lasted through the night. He was no longer merely a scholar. He was becoming a lover. And love, in Rumi's language, was always another name for the divine. Then Shams vanished. Some say he was murdered, some say he left, some say he dissolved into mystery. History cannot fully explain it, but what matters is the effect. Rumi searched desperately. He traveled, he wrote letters, he refused to accept the emptiness. In his grief, he wrote lines that still echo centuries later. Why are you so busy with this or that, or good or bad? Pay attention to how things blend. He was learning something terrible and sacred at the same time, that loss is not separate from union, that absence can become a doorway. At first, the pain was unbearable. The man who had awakened his heart was gone. The conversations were gone. The gaze that mirrored infinity was gone. But slowly, something astonishing began to happen. Rumi realized that what he loved in Shams was not confined to a body. The presence he mourned had not disappeared, it had expanded. The fire had moved inward. He would later write, "What you seek is seeking you," and perhaps for the first time he understood those words not as poetry, but as experience. Grief stripped him of identity. The respected teacher became a wandering mystic inside his own city. He wept, he spun, he recited verses that seemed to pour out of him like blood from a wound, and in that wound, light entered. "The wound is the place where the light enters you," he wrote, not as metaphor, but as confession. Shams had been the spark, the loss became the furnace. Instead of returning to who he was before, Rumi allowed himself to be undone. This is the part most people avoid. We want healing without dismantling. We want transformation without death. But Rumi shows us that something must collapse. The image of who we think we are must crack. He once wrote, "Die before you die." When Shams disappeared, Rumi did not choose this death, but he surrendered to it. And in surrender, something vast began to emerge. He stopped searching for Shams in the streets and began searching within. The beloved was no longer outside. The beloved was everywhere, in the wind, in the dust, in the rhythm of his own breath. The longing that once attached to a single human being widened into a longing for the infinite, and that longing did not weaken him, it remade him. The poems that followed were not academic, they were volcanic. They carried ecstasy and devastation in the same breath. "I am so small I can barely be seen. How can this great love be inside me?" he asked. That question was no longer theoretical. Love had burned away his smallness. The disappearance of his master had forced him into a direct encounter with the source itself. And this is where the story becomes dangerous, because it suggests that what breaks us might be what opens us, that the person we think we cannot live without may be the bridge, not the destination. Rumi did not stop loving Shams. He loved him more fiercely than ever, but he began to see him as a mirror of God, not a replacement for God. The grief did not vanish, it transformed. Night after night he turned in circles, the beginning of what would become the whirling practice of the Mevli order. But the spinning was not performance, it was surrender. It was the body saying what words could not. I release control. I let myself fall into the center. I let love consume me. And as he surrendered more deeply, the boundary between lover and beloved began to dissolve. The more he turned, the less he knew where he ended and the beloved began. What started as grief slowly became annihilation. Not the annihilation of despair, but the annihilation of separation. Rumi was no longer searching for Shams as a missing man. He was dissolving into the reality Shams had awakened within him. There is a dangerous honesty in this transformation. Most of us, when we lose someone, try to rebuild the same life as quickly as possible. We distract ourselves, we replace, we numb. Rumi did the opposite. He walked directly into the fire. He allowed longing to stretch him beyond comfort. In one of his poems, he writes, "Set your life on fire. Seek those who fan your flames." Shams had been the one who fanned the flames. When he was gone, the fire did not die, it intensified. Now Rumi himself had to become the keeper of it. The longing did not shrink, it expanded until it could no longer be contained in a single human relationship. He began to understand that what he loved in Shams was the divine light reflected through him. And when the mirror disappeared, the light remained. This realization did not come softly, it tore through him. He wrote, "Lovers don't finally meet somewhere, they're in each other all along." What if Shams had not left him? What if the separation was only the final lesson, that the beloved had never been outside? This is the shift that changed everything. Before the loss, Rumi's love had direction. It had a face, a voice, a presence. After the loss, love became vast and formless. It was no longer contained. It flooded his poetry. It flooded his prayers. It flooded the streets of Konya as he walked like a man intoxicated by something invisible. People saw him spinning and thought he had gone mad. In a way, he had. But it was the madness of someone who had broken through the illusion of control. "Where there is ruin, there is hope for a treasure," he wrote. The ruin was real. His heart had collapsed. His reputation had shifted. His former identity as the composed scholar had dissolved. But beneath the ruin, a treasure was forming, direct union. Not intellectual belief, not inherited doctrine, but experience. He was no longer speaking about God as an idea. He was speaking from immersion. This is why his poetry feels alive centuries later. It was not written from comfort. It was written from the edge of loss. When he says, "The wound is the place where the light enters you," he is not offering a comforting slogan. He is describing the architecture of his own transformation. The disappearance of his master forced him into a deeper intimacy with the divine than he had ever known before. But this transformation required something radical, surrender without guarantee. He did not know that beauty would come from the ashes. He did not know his grief would birth thousands of verses. He did not know his name would echo across centuries. All he knew was longing. And instead of resisting it, he listened. He began to see longing not as weakness, but as guidance. The ache in his chest became a compass. In another poem, he writes, "Listen to the reed, how it tells a tale, complaining of separations. The reed flute sings because it has been cut from the reed bed. Separation gives it a voice. In the same way, Rumi's separation gave birth to a music the world had never heard before." And here is the paradox. The more he accepted the loss of Shams, the more present Shams became within him. Not as memory, not as nostalgia, but as consciousness. The teacher he thought he had lost was now alive in every breath. The outer guide had become an inner flame. This is where Rumi found God, not in the return of what he lost, but in the transformation of the loss itself. The absence carved space, the space filled with presence, and in that presence he discovered something that cannot be taken away. Yet the journey was not linear. There were nights of despair. There were moments when longing felt like drowning. But even in those moments, he sensed that something immense was at work. He wrote, "When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about." He had tasted a silence deeper than grief, a silence where the need to understand disappeared. The man who once taught from books was now teaching from burning. And the burning was not destruction, it was purification. Every attachment that was not rooted in the divine began to fall away. What remained was love without condition, without possession, without fear. And as he surrendered further into that fire, something extraordinary began to emerge from the ashes. Something extraordinary began to emerge from the ashes. A love that no longer depended on form. Rumi did not recover from the loss of Shams, he transcended it. The grief that once felt like suffocation became expansion. The longing that once felt like emptiness became fullness. And in that fullness, he discovered that God was not found by holding on, but by letting go completely. He understood that Shams had not been taken from him. Shams had been given to him as a doorway into annihilation of ego, into surrender, into the collapse of the illusion that love can be possessed. "I have been a seeker, and I still am," Rumi wrote, "but I stopped asking the books and the stars. I started listening to the teaching of my soul." That shift is everything. When the external guide disappears, the inner guide must awaken. Rumi's transformation was not about replacing one attachment with another. It was about dissolving attachment into devotion. The beloved human form led him to the beloved without form. And once he tasted that, there was no returning to who he had been. The respected jurist became the intoxicated mystic. The structured scholar became the spinning lover of the infinite. He realized something most of us resist. We do not lose people. We lose the illusion that they are the source. The source was always deeper, always wider, always closer than breath. "Why do you stay in prison when the door is so wide open?" he asks. The prison is the belief that love is scarce. The prison is the fear of losing what we cling to. The door opens the moment we surrender control. When Shams disappeared, Rumi stood at that door. He could have closed his heart. He could have hardened. He could have returned to the safety of intellectual religion. Instead, he chose vulnerability. He chose to let the wound stay open long enough for the light to enter fully. And that light did not merely comfort him, it transformed him. The whirling became a symbol of this surrender. Turning around a center he could not see, he embodied trust. Trust that even in chaos there is a hidden axis. Trust that even in loss there is a deeper embrace. Trust that what feels like abandonment may be invitation. He discovered that God is not found by escaping suffering, but by entering it consciously. And this is why his poetry still moves us today. It was born from real heartbreak, real confusion, real surrender. When he says, "What you seek is seeking you," it is not abstract optimism, it is testimony. He sought Shams in the streets and found the divine in his own heart. He sought the beloved in one face and discovered the beloved in all existence. The story of Rumi losing his master is not only about the 13th century, it is about us. Every time something is taken from us, every time a relationship ends, every time life does not unfold as we expected, we stand where he once stood, at the edge of collapse. And in that collapse, there is a hidden possibility that what is breaking is not our life, but our limitation. Rumi found God not by escaping suffering, but by allowing grief to purify him. He did not bypass the pain. He walked through it until it became prayer. He allowed longing to expand until it touched the infinite. And in doing so, he teaches us something radical. The loss you fear may be the doorway you need. So when you experience absence, ask yourself, what if this is space being created? What if this emptiness is not punishment, but preparation? What if the beloved you think you lost was only the mirror guiding you back to the source? Rumi's life whispers that love is never truly lost. It only changes form, and sometimes it must break your heart open to show you how vast it really is. If this reflection moved something inside you, if it made you see loss in a different light, then subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next journey into these timeless teachings. Leave a like so this message can reach more people who may be standing in their own moment of loss. And share this video with someone who needs to hear that what feels like an ending may actually be the beginning of finding something greater.